This is Bill Moberly at the Americans in Wartime Museum conducting an interview on the 7th of September 2019 with Mr. John Lundin. So John, tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got your start in the military.
Okay. I born in St. Paul, Minnesota, and when I was attending the University of Minnesota, a recruiter came around and for a meteorologist course, and so I enlisted in the Air Force, or the Army then. It was the Air Corps then, and had my basic training at Kearns, Utah, and then took a pre-meteorology course at University of Wisconsin, and then went to Chanute Field for the cadet training, final meteorological course. I graduated as a second lieutenant, was stationed at Tallahassee, Dale Mabry Field in Tallahassee, Florida for 6 months, and then the Army saw fit to send me back to Chanute Field for a weight and balance course, and from there I was transferred over to India. And I spent the first month at Bangalore, India, as a weight and balance officer in their airfield. And then he transferred me to Mishinau, Burma, where I was a weight and balance officer there, loading aircraft going over the hump.
What year was this?
I enlisted in 1943. And this was in 44 when I was sent over to India.
Okay. So how did it feel knowing you're going to the India region and the Burma region? Did you know much about it?
No, it's really entirely new to me and sort of exciting. And Bangalore was an interesting airfield because it's built on a hill. And but Mishinau, I got into Mishinau in January 45.
And what did you do as a loading officer?
Well, primarily I loaded all the aircraft going over the home properly so that it balanced out correctly in the air. They had a lot of accidents from 1941 to 43 over there because the planes were loaded incorrectly. They're overloaded or improperly loaded. And so they saw fit to take their surplus meteorologists and make them weight and balance officers, I guess.
What kind of planes were you loading?
I was loading the C-47s, 46s, anything that came by. Yeah, each plane had its own slide rule for weight distribution, and so that's what so each airplane was tailored to itself.
I see. So did you go anywhere else in that region at the time?
Yes, we went, while I was in Mishinau, we sent the Chinese Army back home to Kunming, and then after that we went down to Kutkai and Lashio to transfer the Mars Task Force over the hump to Kunming.
So did you fly the hump yourself?
I rode over there once. No, I was not a pilot.
Mm-hmm. But you did make the trip.
I did make the trip to see how it was.
And what did you think?
Well, since you're flying at high altitude, I was pretty much asleep on the way over because we didn't have any oxygen masks at that time. Only the pilots had the oxygen masks. Everybody else took it as it came.
And what what altitude was that?
It was 18,000 feet.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
What kind of
It
cargo?
was a C-47.
Mhm.
40, yeah, C-47. Although we did load a lot of C-46s also.
And what kind of cargo were you primarily moving?
Primarily gasoline and regular troop material, but a lot of gasoline was transported over.
I see.
And the planes could not refuel at Kunming because they'd just be using up the gasoline they were bringing over. So there was a lot of hairy flights, I'll tell you, where we did, the ATC discovered the jet stream there, and we flew over from Mission to Kunming in 45 minutes, and it took 9 hours to come back.
Wow.
Because the jet stream was around 130 miles an hour, you see.
Wow.
And the plane could only do 150.
That's a heck of a tailwind or a heck of a headwind.
A heck of a head, yeah.
Which way are you going?
Yeah. When I got there, the pilots were going from one downed aircraft to another, following the aluminum trail, so to speak. And after we started loading them up better, there were less crashes. Yeah. So we were fairly effective.
Was there any hostile action going on in that region?
Yeah. When I arrived there, the base was still being bombed by Japanese aircraft. A single plane would come over at noontime, and drop his bomb, and go back.
Any ground activity or ground?
No. That was all pushed out already by the Mars Task Force. The Marauders took the Missionah in early 44. And then the Mars Task Force came in and then pushed the Japanese further down past Lashio and like Kutkai and so forth, and down into the Bangalore area. And then the British took over from there.
I see. What's your strongest memory from that particular region?
Well, we were pretty much in the jungle there, and so it was a continual battle with malaria. And I took my Atibrand daily, and I did not get malaria, thank goodness, but I did suffer from anemic dysentery. That was sort of painful.
I can imagine.
But I have a number of memories. One going out with a search and rescue airplane as a spotter on my day off. And when we came back, and the next day when he went out, he unfortunately crashed.
Oh my.
So I guess it was lucky. The cot had jammed up against the joystick, and unfortunately he went in. Another exciting was we were flying back from, after loading some of the Mars Task Force at Kutkai, flying north again to Mishnah, to a base unit. As we approached the Iron Range, the mountain range in just south of Lashio, both engines cut out. And the pilot said, Jack, you better open the jump door. So I did that, put on a parachute, saw it didn't have a jungle pack, took it off, put on another one with a jungle pack on it, looked out and spotted where all the roads were and so forth, so that I could orient myself. But luckily enough, we were the mountain range was 11,000 feet there, and we were at 12,000 feet when one engine caught and pulled us on over, and we flew on that one engine all the way up to Michigan. And as we approached the field, it cut out at 400 feet, and so we made a dead stick land. The pilot made a dead stick landing. Needless to say, we visited a flight surgeon for a little schnapps.
What caused the engines to go out? Did they ever find out?
Yeah, I can't think of what the name was.
Magneto?
I just can't think of the name right now. It come to me.
Okay. But it was definitely an engine failure.
It was an engine failure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that was the closest I came ever to bailing out.
Wow. What other things stick in your mind? What other stories do you recall?
Well, the other story was that I remember was when we landed in Kunming on my one trip over. All the coolies on the landing strip pounding rocks into the ground for the landing strip, laying a base for it. And there was one story about Chinese troops that were being flown over there. They'd get there, they'd be minus one or two men, and they were playing a game, and the winner of the loser of that got kicked out of the airplane.
Oh my gosh.
And his officer, lieutenant, when he landed, he picked up one of the coolies to take his place, so they had a full complement.
Wow.
Another big story was when I first arrived there in Michigan, while we were sending the Chinese over, one of the Chinese soldiers got ticked off and threw the hand grenade underneath the tail of the plane and blew up, killed two of his fellow squad members, and his lieutenant shot him on the meat right in place. So their outlook is quite different from ours.
I'd say.
That was sort of impressive.
What were the living conditions like for you as a
Well, we had a lot of rain, of course. When we got there, we were put up in regular squad tents, and then we were later moved to another area, and we built our own tent with a British tent. We were able to put up, we got wooden beams from town and made a regular structure for it, and we had mosquito netting all around it with a nice door and so forth, so we didn't have to sleep under mosquito nets anymore. Had put up a rain trough, so we filled a old wing tank, and so we always had water for drinking as well as washing. Yeah.
Improvise.
And I guess the biggest moment was when the war was over.
Yeah.
Was announced. We were all sitting, it was in the evening when it came through, we were watching a movie Salome where she danced. And the announcement came in, and boy, everybody just flew back to their tents and celebrated. You never heard so much shooting. Next morning, all the PA systems were dead.
You've been shot?
Yeah.
No, my.
So no more morning reveilles.
And how soon after that happened did you get to go home?
Well, that was in August, and I spent Christmas in Karachi. I was flown back in October to Bangalore, where we then was put in a waiting pool for further transfer back to the States. And then we went to Karachi, got on the Santa Rosa cruise ship, which was a cruise ship that did the California region stretch, and was built for 300 passengers. We had 1,500. So in our stateroom that we had, that was built for two, we had 16 men in it.
That must have been awful.
Yeah.
So what was life on that ship? It must have just been wall-to-wall people.
Yeah,
Crowded.
we were, yeah. And we only had two meals. One, the ship was divided up into two sections, one in early morning and one in later in the morning, and the same in the evening. But we only had two meals.
How was the trip back? Was it a rough ride, or?
Well, it was very pleasant all the way through the Mediterranean and so forth, through Gibraltar, until we hit the North Atlantic, which was in January, and we hit one of those winter storms, and the ship made only 1 nautical mile the whole day.
Wow. So how long did it take you to get home?
About a week and a half, I think it was about. Yeah, came in
Where'd you come into?
New York. Yeah.
And how long did you stay in the service after that?
Well, I probably a month. We were transferred back out to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, and I was discharged from there.
I see. Now, from the time the war ended to the time you finally left the Burma area, what were you doing? What they have you do?
Nothing.
Oh, really?
So we had plenty of time to visit this Calcutta and what have you, and enjoy the ice cream again for the first time, which was quite enjoyable. So during the time we did, one of the fellows came in and says, "Hey, out at the dump there's a whole bunch of Harley Davidson motorcycles. Let's scrounge them together and build one." And so we made a working model, and we had, of course, try that.
What would they do with the base after the war is over? Just leave it, or?
I don't know what they did. My friend that was in the weather bureau there, he stayed on until January, I know. And it would get he had some scary accounts too, because the natives started taking things back.
Yeah, I can imagine that would happen.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the very beginning. You were in college in the early 40s, right?
Right.
And what do you remember about Pearl Harbor Day? Do you remember?
Well, Pearl Harbor Day, I remember I was with my pals from high school, and we were in my friend's garage working on a radio. when the news came through that Pearl Harbor. And so the next day there was a big meeting in the auditorium in University of Minnesota, and we heard the president's speech then. And then the university went on a advanced program, or that sped up, and so they were going to graduate us in 3 years instead of 4. And so we went through summer school and the fall, and then it was that fall that the recruiter came around, and we decided to do our
Your duty.
share for the country.
Yeah, the atmosphere was a lot different then, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
What was it like?
Well, everybody's for the military, and let's get this war over. I remember when World War II began in the September of '39. I was out at State Fair in the grandstands watching a show when they announced that Britain declared war on Germany.
Very memorable events.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what did your parents think about you going into the military? How'd that go?
Well, they were quite concerned, and but they were happy that I was going to be a meteorologist. But then while I was in pre-meteorology school in Wisconsin, my father passed away.
Oh.
And so we had to go home for that funeral, so that was kind of a low point.
Yeah.
And then I came back in December for a leave before we went overseas.
I see. And I guess a lot of people from your town had been in the service? Or...
Oh yeah, all my friends are in the service, yeah.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had a brother, he was 13 years older than I was, and he worked for this telephone company, so he was given a draft deferment.
I see. Did you have anybody else in the family that had served in the military before?
No.
Or no?
No,
So this was a new world for you?
that was a new world for me, yeah.
Wow. What's the funniest thing you remember happening in the service? You've had several interesting events.
Well, there's nothing that really came to mind except to stay at the Wisconsin, the premier. We had a very good commanding officer there, and he really taught us military discipline and procedures and what have you. But we lived right on the dormitory, right there, right on the lake, so we had our own swimming. Take care. I was one of the lifeguards, and the food there was excellent compared to Kearns, Utah.
Yeah. How was the food overseas?
Well, I used to tell the story when I arrived in Michigan. We'd look at the food and brush off the cockroaches, and then pretty soon we'd just brush away the food and eat the cockroaches. Wasn't really that bad, but the food was all dehydrated food and what have you. You know. Although a couple of exceptions. One time, one of the fellows brought in a deer that he'd shot in the jungle, and we had venison. That was very good. The water buffalo is awful tough. And one flight came back from Vietnam with a load of watermelon, and that was a big celebration.
I bet. So you had planes going all over that region.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This call sign for mission office Foxtrot Charlie.
How far was Vietnam from there?
Well, it was all. You got to fly over the hump and then into Vietnam.
Another long flight.
It was a long flight, yeah. Yeah, they had to deliver a load of gasoline into troops there in Vietnam.
You don't hear about that very often.
No.
You know.
They may have delivered it to the what were they called? Flying Tigers
I see.
that were operating down that region.
Yeah. Now, when you flew over the hump, did you see the Burma Road at all, or? was that-
Yeah, the Burma Road ran right below where we flew over. Yeah. Yeah, and the only thing I know is the stories they told me about it. That they had every 10th truck they had a mounted 50 gauge machine gun on it to protect themselves from the Chinese bandits. Not from the Japanese, but from the Chinese bandits.
Wow.
So a lot that I had there. One time I went up to Lido Road with a dance band that one of my soldiers that worked for me formed, and played for the troops up there as a colored outfit that were doing the engineering work on the Lido Road.
Wow.
That was an airstrip trip too.
Wow. So, how do you think the war affected you for the rest of your life? What did you take from the war experience?
Well, it gave me a big appreciation for the United States. And of course, the GI Bill really helped out. Tuition then wasn't too bad. I know my first year at Minnesota, I spent only $150 the whole year because I lived at home. And the tuition was only $27 a quarter.
Wow.
Quite different from nowadays.
I'd say. So you took advantage of the GI Bill?
Oh yes, yeah.
How'd you do so?
Well,
For college and...
I finished up my undergraduate degree in Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and with my meteorology training, I was able also to major in physics and mathematics.
And what did you do after the war? What kind of jobs did you do?
Well, then I went on for my master's degree in radiochemistry. That's use of radioactive isotopes to follow chemical reactions. And I was able to get an instructor's job at McAllister College simultaneously, and then later I became an instructor, and then became an assistant professor at McAllister College. And then Then a recruiter from CIA came by and recruited me for the CIA, and I spent 35 years with them.
Good on you, man. So what did you do there? I mean, what?
I was a nuclear engineer.
Okay.
They sent me to the Oak Ridge School of Reactor Technology,
How about that?
and that was in 1956 and 7. And that was the only nuclear engineering school at that time.
So 10 years after the agency was formed, you're going to nuke school with them. That's
Yeah.
pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, I joined the agency in 1951.
Oh, okay. And you did how many years? 35?
35, yeah.
Good on you. I did 32. So, yeah, small world.
Yeah, I was a scientific intelligence officer. We'll let it go at that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I will say that I sort of majored in nuclear power and propulsion for naval aircraft or naval ships, and also nuclear rocketry.
You just never know where things are going to go, don't you?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
It's an amazing life.
but I really enjoyed that, my tour there.
Yeah. That's great. So this video may be seen by people in the future, since it's going to be at the Library of Congress and at our museum, and
Yeah.
of course your family will see it. Is there anything you'd like to tell them about your military service, or anything about, having served, that you'd like them to know?
Well, I enjoyed my military service. I think I got a lot out of it. It made a mature individual out of me, taught me leadership. Of course, I got my first taste of leadership as an Eagle Scout and Boy Scouts, but
Which you've also stayed with all your life as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I've been in scouting now for over 55 years now.
Wow. You're a man of service in many ways.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you live long.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
anything else
my key to long life is breathe every morning.
That's a good lesson.
Keep breathing.
That's right.
But I've been very fortunate in good health all my life.
That's great. So, what would you say to your kids or your grandchildren or great grandchildren about your service? Is there a message there you'd like to leave with them?
Well, the military is not that bad, and you follow their discipline and so forth, you will have no problems.
And it certainly opened up a lot of doors for you, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did.
That's good.
Yeah, I've had a pretty interesting life.
I'd say. I'd say. Anything else you'd like to recount from your service?
No, I guess that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, very
It's
impressive.
a good summary.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you, of course, for your service.
Yeah, thank you.